Good day, everybody. Today we deal with Japan. And here it is, Japan, the four home islands. Kyushu on the bottom, Shikoku here sort of in the middle, the big one, Honshu. Up here is Hokkaido. It's an interesting neighborhood. Got Korea right here, China, Mongolia way out this way, and of course here's Russia sneaking its way down, China out this way. As you can see, Japan, volcanic islands, and they're isolated from everybody, and that's just the way they like it. Yep, they tend not to deal a lot with the outside world, but it wasn't always like that. Get to the beginning here. Early Japan. We have no evidence of any Stone Age people around 30,000 BC. The rest of the world, we find people around 30,000 BC. We can't even find bones on Japan until 11,000 BC. In fact, there may not have even been trees on Japan until 40,000 BC. Yeah, no trees. Must have been some seriously active volcanoes. Pottery dating to 10,000 BC. Wait a minute, is that right? 10,000 BC? That can't be right. But yeah, it dates back to 10,000 BC. Why am I shouting about this? Because if you remember, agriculture began 8,500 BC, somewhere around there. How do you know it's agriculture? Because you made pottery. You got to put something in pottery, and it's usually grain. But they've already got agriculture in 10,000 BC. But it's not supposed to be 8,500 BC. See? Yeah, maybe not. Put a pin in that one. We'll take a look at that later. So, pottery is used to date early Japanese history. Pointed bottom is always the oldest. Why is it a pointed bottom? It's volcanic soil, right? Take a look at what you're drinking. I know you're drinking something right now. Hopefully it's not alcoholic. I won't I won't judge anybody. But bottom of your bottle, glass, cup, what have you, is flat. But on the table, doesn't fall over. Well, if you have unsteady soil, you're going to drive it into the dirt, kind of like at the beach, right? Same sort of thing in Japan. So pointed pottery is the earliest. They call this Jomen pottery. They have like this a rope-like design called Jomen on it. See, there it is. See these little rope-like little designs, distinctly Japanese. Look here at the pointed bottom. You know, this would be unstable if you put it on a flat surface, so it's being driven into the ground. Keep them falling over. Jomen pottery. Now, believe it or not, the Japanese weren't the first people on this island. People there called Ainu. Are these Japanese Aborigines? I don't know, because the second wave of immigration, called Yayoi, came into Japan around 300 BC, and guess who's on the beach waving at them? Ainu. It looks a little bit Japanese, but there's definitely some Caucasian features here. So you got the big skull-shaped debate. They used to talk about the people of skulls. Yeah, people different shaped skulls and things like this. Japanese have Korean and Chinese ancestry. They have to, because if you got to Japan, how'd you get there? Had to go across the ocean, right? So Korea and Japan across the way. It's a very sensitive subject in Japan. Japanese subways are very quiet. If you start shouting you've got Japanese or Chinese ancestry, it's going to get loud real fast. So don't do that. Yayoi tombs, early Japan. They could be anywhere because, like the Mykenans over in Greece, way over in Greece, they tend to dig into hills. And Japan, being a chain of volcanic islands, have nothing but hills, so they could be anywhere. They actually built around it. In Greece, when they're on a construction site and they find something, they usually stop everything. In Japan, they stop and then continue, and everything gets done on time because they're Japanese. They get it right the first time. Small nation, not as many resources. Greece, they stop, and the hardest problem is getting started again. And more on early Japan here. Now, we can't find many written sources. The Japanese are actually using a Chinese script. So our first dated history is kind of like, Thucydides and Herodotus. You find them in 712 and 720 AD. It's called the Records of Ancient Matters and the Records of Japan. All right, so kind of figure out what they're talking about. So we have to use evidence from tombs and the Chinese chronology to learn what's going on in Japan. Got to work backwards. So if you look in Chinese journals, we know the Chinese love to keep, accurate records. Hey, somebody visited from Japan in 712 and then he went back, and then somebody from Japan came by in 712. You have to work backwards. The guy from Japan showed up in 712 and talked about this, that, and this, so you know what's going on in Japan from Chinese records. When we go into tombs, what do you find? Lots of fighting because there's tons of weapons in these tombs. Not like the Harappans where you can't find any weapons. Japan, weapons all over the place. They may have been mixed up in the fighting on the Korean Peninsula a little bit. Japan is a country that can honestly boast they've never been invaded. Yeah, 3 times Japan has faced invasion. We'll get to that in a second. Now, Japanese religion, the early religion, is known as Shinto, and of course it's still around. It's a form of early nature worship. And it's kind of strange to understand, but take Mount Fuji there, for instance. It's not the home of a god, but the result of nature itself. So it's sort of a holy site, but you don't worship it like you do the Kaaba or any icons or anything. It's nature itself. Sounds a little bit like Native American religion. Also, it's also linked with the state and the ruling aristocracy. We have nature deities they called kami. Don't worry too much about that. Like I said, I got to leave something for the religious studies department to deal with. So just know Shinto is a form of Japan's early nature worship. Now, Japan is basically an extension of China in the early Middle Ages. The Chinese alphabet is what the Japanese were using. They reworked it into Japanese forms. They wanted to look Japanese. We have an emperor with a mandate of heaven, and he's a living god. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, picked up that concept from the Chinese. How many dynasties have the Chinese had? Go ahead. Think about it. All I need to hear is more than one, right? 12, if you want to get technical about it. How many dynasties in Japan? I give you a hint. Somewhere between 0 and 2. They've had one dynasty their entire existence, the Chrysanthemum throne. Now, they've had regular embassies to Tang, China from 607 onward. So they go to visit Tang, China, and they're bringing back Chinese calendar, Chinese art, even Buddhism. So there's quite a few religions floating around in Japan. Apparently, they seem to live in harmony with each other. So it's almost Tang China 2.0 over in Japan. Here's a couple of emperors and empress I'd like you to know about. We have Emperor Timu, reigning from 678 to 686, and his wife Jito, from 686 to 697. What do you notice about those dates? Yeah, one right behind the other. And Jito's a lady. It's a husband and wife team over here. Yeah, this isn't, Jito is not Empress Wu, and there's Theodora again. Believe me, you'll love her. What's going on? That means Japan had a female empress, right? And she was accepted right after her husband, right? See that, 686? And she's around a while. So how about that? Japan, female empress. It can happen. Strange. Never really saw Japan as a bastion of feminism. Now, how close are China and Japan? Well, the records of Japan, they describe Emperor Timu as walking like a tiger in the eastern lands. This always draws Japanese scholars in like pieces of metal to a magnet because it's a Chinese phrase. So we're talking about a Japanese emperor using a Chinese phrase. That tells you how close China and Japan are. And of course, there's no tigers in Japan. Siberian tigers live in, Siberia, northern China, Mongolia. So the Japanese government is a clone of Tang China. So they've got a bureaucracy set up. We have ourselves an emperor. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there has been exactly one dynasty in Japanese history. Nara becomes the capital of Japan in 710. The capital was basically wherever the emperor was. Tended to travel around all 4 islands, kind of see what's going on. And 710, they decided to make Nara a permanent capital. Why Nara? Don't worry about the map on page 265, because you didn't have to get that book. And the reason Nara becomes the capital because it's flat land. What's so great about flat land? Because agriculture, you can grow grain there. It's very hard to do this in the mountains. And if you build the capital where the food is, hey, you've got power. Because if somebody on the other side of the island upsets you, you cut off the food supply. Now, we also see a lot of Buddhist temples over there, even today. May have had some kind of influence, but we're not 100% sure on that. Later on, they moved up the road a little bit there to Hinnan and Kyoto, later known as Tokyo. It's not a very much a move. It's slightly into the mountains. Again, flat land, now you got something you can defend. So a mountain next to the flat land where you grow all the grain. Makes perfect sense to me. Now, the government, like I said, looked like China, but there's no exam system. Everything in Japan was hereditary, including the farmer's land. Yeah, he's not even rich. A poor farmer, when he dies, automatically goes to his son. The nobility can't really touch it. Not saying he didn't try, but, according to Japanese law at the time, everything's hereditary. So even people in the Japanese government, if somebody's an accountant and he dies, then his son gets the job. Like we said, it doesn't always not the best system to use because not everybody's the same. Not everyone has the same thing. I know plenty of people who like math and they have kids who love history, and vice versa. So that's what's going on over there in Japan. Now, where do the samurai fit into all this? Because when you say Japan, boom, samurai comes right to mind. Well, why do they have these samurai? Well-armored, elite soldiers. No danger of an attack from nomads. I mean, they're surrounded by water. Japan had experienced conscription, drafting people and training them, but what would you do with an army sitting on islands with, virtually no chance of being attacked? So they just threw that one out the window. Now, this is kind of a precursor to feudalism. We have mounted warriors, your samurai, mounted or on foot, but, gallop around on a horse looks really cool. They don't have to pay taxes, remitted for military service. So there you are. You serve the emperor, don't have to pay taxes. Of course, it's kind of a 24/7 job, so, didn't say it was perfect. Later on, you have armed bands by warlords, Fujiwara. Sometimes these guys tend to go rogue. But, it doesn't happen that often in Japan, but it has happened on a few occasions. Now, samurai, it's a Japanese word. It means to serve. First shows up in a regional tax revolt, 935 to 940. There you are. It's always about money. Samurai, elite warriors, serve the emperor, glorified tax collector on occasion. So, somebody decided they didn't like the taxes, they revolt, send in the samurai, right? Hack and slash and get it under control. Well, it looks like the samurai have a lot of work to do because the east side of Japan tends to be the Wild West for Japan, or in this case, the Wild East. And, well, the reason it is, we got mountains in the Kanto Plain over there. They're trying to steal food, and, they're up in the mountains, grab the food, run back in the mountains. Samurai have to go up after them, so it's never easy. Samurai get lots of practice. No one has ever attempted to seriously overthrow the Japanese emperor. There's only been 2 serious attempts to do so. The Heiji War, 1159-1160, only serious challenge to the emperor. As you can see, only lasted about a year, so samurai took care of that. The only other time anyone tried to overthrow the emperor? 1945. Yeah, after being hit with 2 A-bombs, the emperor decided to surrender on terms, and some elements of the Japanese military wanted to continue fighting and attempted to overthrow him. As you guess, it didn't work. Later on, we got shoguns. Remember I told you about rogue samurai? We got warlords taking over and, a series of weak emperors, and here come the shoguns. Basically, a shogun is a warlord with tons of samurai following him. Now, down the road, you already know what to expect. We talked about the Mongols attempted to invade Japan twice, 1274 and 1280. Didn't get there due to the kamikaze, divine wind. 1274, Mongol fleet is wrecked. 1280, Mongols rebuild the fleet, grab some of the Song ships. Once again, hit by the wind, and a few Mongols waterlogged to make it to the beach, and that's about it. When's the next time Japan faces an invasion? Yep, 1945, right? In the 1300s, we have more militaristic governments. These are dominated by shoguns with puppet emperors. We had emperors who weren't very strong. And the shoguns, these are warlords running on their own with their own samurai. They kind of dominate the emperor, i.e. puppet emperor. This is something that's going to go on for 600 years, right, all the way to 1945. It keeps popping up again. Strange for a ancient medieval course, right? The Tang model of governments overthrown for what they call the bakufu. These are tent governments. Instead of an emperor with a hereditary bureaucracy, we have basically a military government. So they decide who they want to run the government, and they pull people in and out however they feel they need. Now, Japan has a warring states period starting in 1467. Not quite as bad as China, but like I said, there are a lot of rogue shoguns running around. They fight with each other, trying to overthrow the government, and mostly fail. The emergence of the Bushido, way of the warrior. Yeah, we know all about that as Americans, don't we? Found that out in Second World War. Do not retreat, do not surrender. A lot like the Spartans. But yeah, the Japanese take it literally. You fight to the death. To be captured is a disgrace. You are supposed to commit seppuku, ritualistic suicide, and a very, very hardcore society. Why? Because it's not that big a country, and you have to use all your resources effectively, get it right the first time, sort of thing. So that's all we're going to have for Japan right now. You guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.